Welcome to Bow Ties Are Sometimes Cool with myself, Ashley, and Ed. Say hello, Ed.
Good evening, Ashley.
Evening. So today we're going to talk about Jon Pertwee, or is it John Devon Rowland Pertwee, or is it? I think his surname is actually Pertwee, wasn't it, or something like that?
Pertwee du Leilvo or something like that, as I remember.
So absolutely no. So that is today's, depends when you listen to it, I suppose, podcast. So I suppose kick off then. Why are we? I was going to say why are we doing Jon Pertwee? Really, because of course, if it wasn't Jon Pertwee, it would be another Doctor. But I do know that he's one of your favourites, Ed. So
he is. It wasn't always that way, but I'm doing a watch through at the moment, hashtag from the beginning, and I've really this time suddenly. Was last year I watched Pertwee, 49 years old last year. I've been watching Doctor Who since as long as I can remember, and suddenly I got Pertwee. I hadn't got him before. I'd always thought of him as the boring establishment, the most inverted commas Tory Doctor that there was. I know. But then this time I sort of watched him and I thought, this he's the cleverest Doctor of them all because he's playing the establishment. He's playing the pompous, arrogant establishment figure, but he's actually an anarchist in disguise. He's an eco-warrior disguised as a member of a gentleman's club.
I must admit, I haven't seen all of Pertwee's. I've seen bits and bobs because I watch it and catching up on BritBox. I'm not doing it hashtag from the beginning. I'm not doing anything in any particular order. I'm just sort of watching things randomly. For me, in actual fact, he's really Worzel Gumidge, which we'll come on to in a bit anyway.
Yes, but of course.
That was my the first thing I ever saw with Jon Pertwee in, and Doctor Who was very much secondary. It's kind of like as I got into Doctor Who and the time went on, and then you look back and think, who were the previous Doctors? Let's watch a bit of that. It was like, oh, never seen him in anything before. And it's like anything when you see them, and then you find out that obviously they've done previous work, and you tend to think, oh, why did they choose to do that? It goes out of chronological order in your own mind. There's only a few that I can probably sort of say I love though, which is like Death to the Daleks, Damon's, which I think is actually probably one of his favourites actually. And a few others. The Green Death, I watched that more recently. There's a lot of if you sort of started to describe the story, I would probably know which one you were talking about. But I can't label them as per episodes. I'm just being totally upfront there. If you told me the title of an episode, I'd go, yeah.
Well, my first exposure to Jon Pertwee was I can vivid memories. I must have been 4, maybe 5, no, probably 4, and we were in my tide's house with my mum, and she was doing my tides washing for him, and she bought me a chocolate bar from the shops, and it was a Doctor Who chocolate bar. And to my little 4-year-old head, Tom Baker was Doctor Who. I didn't have any concept of any Doctor Who before Tom Baker. But this chocolate bar had this man in a frilly shirt and a ruffled white hair driving a yellow car. And I said, but Mummy, that's not Doctor Who. And she said, no, that was the Doctor Who before the one with the scarf. And then suddenly my mind was expanding. There was other Doctor Whos. I can remember thinking that, and I remember where I was. So my mum then told me about Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell before that. That was what for me. So as a 4, I must have been 4 because because for the chocolate bars to still be in the shop, Tom Baker must be very, very recent as the Doctor. So I could have even been 3. Mm-hmm. But I remember it as a moment, my mental mind being expanded. And so that was my first exposure to Pertwee. After that, Worzel Gumidge and all the show busy things he did. But I suppose, like for you, he'll always be Worzel first. For me, he'll be the first Doctor that wasn't Tom Baker for me.
Sure.
I didn't see any of his episodes, though, until the BBC did a repeat season in 1980 called The 5 Faces of Doctor Who. And they showed a story called Carnival of Monsters, and they showed 3 Doctors, and that was my first exposure to Pertwee. But going back to sort of how he was cast, the show was on a bit of a low point in the late 60s after Troughton. The ratings had taken a nosedive. The BBC was moving into colour, and it was almost like the show didn't it might not have come back. Troutman's regeneration, if you see it, you don't actually see Troutman changing the Pertwee. He just sort of spirals off into a void. And then Pertwee was cast, if I'm correct, a bit of time after that. Now, Pertwee was known at the time for sort of radio comedies like Putney Post Office and The Navy Lark, and he was in the Carry On films. So he was known as a more of a comedic actor, but he wanted to play it completely straight, which is what he did. Whereas Troutman was a lot more sort of clowning around and Chaplin-esque, and, you know, Pertwee was a straight, dashing, sort of Adamant James Bondish sort of character, which we hadn't had before. And actually, sorry if I'm rambling on here, you can cut as much as you like.
No.
But actually, Pertwee's first season 7 of Old Doctor Who, it's the series that sort of sticks out like a sore thumb from the rest of Doctor Who, that for being so completely different, because the Doctor was exiled to Earth. So yeah, you had the TARDIS prop, you didn't have any journeys in the TARDIS at all. You had the Doctor grounded on Earth by the Time Lords for breaking the laws of time when he was the Troutman and the Hartnell Doctor by interfering. So his punishment was you're stranded on Earth or grounded on Earth until the Time Lords see fit to grant you your freedom again. And season 7 was almost like as if the BBC had sold the rights of Doctor Who to ITC, and it'd be done as an ITC film series. So it had a lot more of the feeling, sort of the Saint, the Avengers, the Champions. It was a lot more action-based, a lot harder edged, a lot more gritty than it had been before. None of the whimsy that it had had. That sort of, I don't think it was as successful as they wanted it to be. So, for example, the companion Liz Shaw was played by the late Caroline John. I don't think she was as popular as they expected, because she was almost on the Doctor's level intelligence-wise. So there was no one there to say, who's that Doctor? What's that Doctor? What do we do now, Doctor? Because she got it all. You almost had the Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart almost as the de facto sort of asking the questions audience figure in that series. So sort of it was, they had a bit of Barry Letts and Terence Dix, who were in charge of the series and the showrunners, had a bit of a think about how to do the format. And really, the inverted commas Pertwee era, as we know it, began with Series 8, because there you had the unit family. You had the Doctor, you had his assistant Joe Grant, the Brigadier, Mike Yates, Sergeant Benson, and the ubiquitous Roger Delgado as the Master, who was almost a de facto villain all the way through the Pertwee era. So it was really Series 8 where the sort of, like we said with the, you know, when we were talking about Connery, like Goldfinger sort of set the template of how Bond films should be made. It was almost like season 8 set the template of how the Pertwee era was going to pan out. So we got that. I think season 7 was to a fan, season 7 was an incredibly successful series. To a general viewing audience, it probably wasn't that successful, but they got the format down for Series 8, and that was incredibly successful because they were regularly getting 10 to 12 million viewers.
Going back to so talking about the template, because I was sort of reading things, and obviously one of the reasons that Jon Pertwee left was the Master, which Roger
Delgado.
Yeah, I can't, because he passed away, hadn't he? And I think there was some of the other writers were going to finish as well. I think one of the producers was about to finish on the serial as well, and so I think that's why Pertwee sort of it came to an end. I think they wanted him to try and stay for another series, yeah. And then, so he said, "Well, I'll stay for another series if you give me this," and showed him a figure on a piece of paper, which they said, "Well, best of luck."
You've been great, John, but no. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, Roger Delgado passed away in quite tragic circumstances. He was killed in a road accident while making a film in Turkey. Also, Katie Manning, who Jon Pertwee adored, who played his companion Jo Grant, who played her for 3 years, she was moving on to other things. So it was almost like the old gang was falling apart. So you had Liz Sladen cast as Sarah Jane, who's I think is seen probably more as Tom Baker's companion. Roger Delgado had gone. You had, Mike Yates wasn't in it as much anymore. The Doctor had his freedom to travel in the TARDIS back, so the unit family wasn't being used as much as it had been before. So it was almost like what had worked for 3 years in Pertwee's last season, which is the one with Death to the Daleks in, was slowly being sort of pulled apart a little bit at a time. I think yourself, when something stops being fun, it's almost like time to quit. But he had 5 years, and he turned almost was a one-man band with his writers, turned the show around to something was which is almost on the verge of cancellation, to being a staple of Saturday night television that we remember it being.
I think we're going to probably expand Bow Ties Are Sometimes Cool out a little bit to entertainment in general, because, you know,
We are.
Obviously Doctor Who and James Bond is quite niche. So we're going to go into all sorts of little directions with it. But seeing that's why it came about, and that's why we've got the podcast title, it only seems right to see if there's a connection between Jon Pertwee and James Bond. And as it happens, there is a connection, quite a strong connection.
You're going to have to enlighten me here.
Well, Jon Pertwee was a naval officer, and he was in a special division, which was a special secret division, which meant that he had quite a few meetings with the likes of Churchill, and also in this, what would you say, group, division, what would you call it, Ed? Trying to think what you would call it.
I'd say division. Division sounds good.
Yeah, division. Let's go with the division. And so a member of this division as well was Ian Fleming.
Wow.
So they were actually in the Navy together, and not just in the Navy together at the same time, they were actually in the same division together. And Jon Pertwee was, I suppose, not. Sometimes I think there was a rumor that he was maybe a partial inspiration for James Bond, but I don't think that's true, really. I think, if anything, he would be an inspiration potentially for Major Boothroyd, because part of Jon Pertwee's role was to train and demonstrate gadgets to other naval officers.
I had no idea.
He was almost the Q of the Navy.
Wow, that's a new one on me. That's a new one on me. I had no idea.
Now, coming on to Worzel, because we'll touch on Doctor Who again, I'm sure. But Worzel Gumidge for me. So when was that? Late 70s.
Late 70s, 77.
Yeah, maybe a bit later actually, maybe 70. Because it went into the 80s, didn't it? But I think it only had like a 3-year run, so it must be late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. Now, I remember that. I do remember that show vividly, because, to be honest, it used to be my Sunday mornings. My Sunday mornings were, we'd wake up, we'd have the paper delivered, because that's what used to happen in those days. It's a bit of a strange concept for some people listening now, that you'd actually have a paper round, people delivering things. The paper would be delivered. Then I'd get into bed with my mum and dad sitting in the middle, and we'd sit there watching Sunday morning TV, which always had Worzel Gumidge. And I just loved it. I just couldn't get my head around that when I saw him on the odd interview, how different he was, which I know sounds stupid because clearly he looks totally different to Worzel Gumidge, but just in terms of his voice as well. Because I think Jon Pertwee used to say he couldn't do impressions. He could never imitate anyone. And I think that was because his voice was quite distinctive. I don't think he
had the lisp as well, didn't he?
Yeah. So I don't think he could, but he could copy accents. So he was, in that sense, he could do voices, but just not impressions. So, I just loved it. Now, I met Jon Pertwee in 1993, and I was at a Doctor Who convention, and I went to get go get his autograph. We had a little chat. He talked about name actually being Gone with the Wind, which actually, as it happens, is where I'm named after. That is why I'm named Ashley, from the character in Gone with the Wind. Anyway, so we had a little chat about that. I was just in total awe. Such a presence when he entered the room. He was about 6'2", something like. But he was there in his full Doctor Who regalia. But there was just, when they say about the X Factor, he certainly had the X Factor, and I don't think it was just because. Well, I suppose obviously yes, because he was famous and he was special to me. But I can't put my finger on it. It's not just that's a celebrity. There was something very different about him. The only time I've ever experienced anything to that level, I suppose, would be Roger Moore as well. I've met a lot of celebrities, and I've been awestruck. But I just think his presence in the room, just literally just being in the room, you feel there's something special going on.
Yeah, it's like you're saying about Sir Roger. Certain actors have got a certain star quality about them, And again, yeah, you say Pertwee would walk on a stage with his big cloak and billowing behind him, and he'd just have that presence.
I do remember this one story which Jon Pertwee said, well, obviously I don't think it's true. I think it's a bit of a creative I think there's a bit of an embellishment here, but the story goes, he was going to a convention in his full Doctor Who regalia, and he was going by train. So he got onto the train, and it was absolutely packed. There was no seats anywhere, but there was one sort of carriage that was boxed off, reserved, and it was for some hospital ward or some hospital project. But he thought, well, I'll go and sit in there. So anyway, then these doctors arrived and they all sat down, and it was seen that the carriage was reserved for a psychiatric ward of people who were quite eccentric, shall we say. So they were there, and the doctor said, right, let's do a quick count up now. So he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4. He got to Jon Pertwee. I said, who are you? He goes, I'm Doctor Who. And he goes, right, 5, 6, 7. And carried on. So that's how the story goes. And he had plenty of them. He was quite a raconteur, really. He had plenty of stories.
Yeah, I mean, I saw him. I didn't meet him, unfortunately, but I saw him bizarrely in Colwyn Bay, 1995. I think an evening with Jon Pertwee, and again, he told a lot. I think he might have told that one, but he told a lot of his stories. Yeah, I mean, yeah, showbiz anecdotes. Yeah, going back to the first season, Jon Pertwee did as Doctor Who. It was that successful with fans that his first story, Spearhead from Space, is still to this day viewed by a vast majority of fans as the most impressive debut story for any Doctor. It was, again, it sort of almost made the template for how a debut story should be. Ever since then, you've had the Doctor incapacitated half the story while they try and work out who they are. They have the scene where they find the clothes, they have the scene where they find themselves, and then the scene where the people they've known for says, you're not the Doctor, you look completely different. So it's got it hits all those beats, and it sort of sets the template for every post-regeneration story that's been. Yeah, you had it again in season 7, possibly highly regarded one of the best Doctor Who stories ever, called Inferno. It was originally meant to be a 4-part story, but they were told to extend it to 7 parts, and think, what do we do here? And it was quite an okay-ish story about a drilling project. Yeah, fine, But when they had to put in an extra 3 episodes, they put in this whole extra subplot about a parallel universe. So it's the first time they'd had parallel universes in Doctor Who. So you'd have the Doctor, right, he's trying to get his TARDIS to work, and instead of getting his TARDIS to work, he transports himself to sort of a parallel version of Earth where, basically, I know it's a sort of sci-fi cliche, but where it looks like where the Nazis won World War II. So you've got a fascist version of the Brigadier, a fascist version of Sergeant Benton and Elizabeth Shaw, but because it's sort of slave labour in the drilling project sort of 3 days ahead of our Earth. So the disaster that the Doctor's trying to prevent on our Earth is you actually see it playing out in that one.
So what episode was that again? I'm gonna have to
Inferno. It's 7 parts. It's about a drilling project, and it sort of shows the green eco-warrior side to the Doctor quite a lot, in a time where it really wasn't spoken about. 1970, wasn't it? Eco-politics were probably not on anybody's radar, but you've got this whole thing about energy and use of energy, and incredibly far ahead of its time. And then you've got the parallel universe subplot, which makes it turns into being, it's quite a good story to be in one of the classics.
Because when I suppose that's the thing here, when I go on to BritBox and I look at back, those stories then, they were all quite fairly long, really, weren't they? They were about 3 hours, aren't they? When you think about more the my era that that I enjoy, which is like Sylvester McCoy and whatever. I mean, you can get a couple of his stories in during the course of one of Jon's.
Yeah, I think again it was budgetary, because you think they've got 4 stories of 7 parts each. They can use the same actors, they can use the same sets. I mean, that's real world sort of effect of it. So rather than having to do, 6 4-part stories. They can do 4 7-part stories, and it'll cost, from production thing, it'll cost them less to do it.
Oh yeah, I guess what yeah. You're not having to have all new sets and so on. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and all new actors. You pay the actor for doing the job rather than, you're not having to pay new actors. You're not having to get new sets. You're not having to get new costume designers. You're paying one script writer for 7 episodes rather than 2 for 2 4-parters.
I did quite like the fact that a lot of his episodes were based on Earth, though. I feel it's a stupid comment, this, but it almost makes Doctor Who feel more relatable, if that could ever be the case.
I agree with you completely. When Pertwee said, when he was first interviewed about it, his famous quote was, "There's nothing more scary than finding a Yeti on the loo in Tooting Bec."
Yeah, no, but no, it's true, because it's the case of, well, yeah, as a kid, you're thinking, oh my God, this could happen. You never know, I might be around the corner and there may be a monster there or what have you, or a dinosaur, all of a sudden.
I mean, his first 3 seasons were pretty much Earthbound, apart from the odd episode with the Time Lords gave him dispensation and sent him on a special mission. But talking about the relatable sort of side, making it more real, there's a story called Day of the Daleks, with, surprisingly, has the Daleks in it.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's a time travel sort of one. I think one that modern Doctor Who would call timey-wimey. But there's just a scene that, again, it brings it home how relatable it is, because there's a sort of like a guerrilla warrior from the future who is captured. They take the weapon off him. It's like a laser gun. But the Doctor takes the weapon, he sort of analyses it. He goes, oh, yeah, the metal for that was mined not far from here in North Wales. So little things like that make it sort of much more relatable than it was mined on the planet Raxacorica Phalopatorius, so what? But with, say, North Wales, it would make, oh God, Doctor Who's happening in my world. I could go around the corner and there'll be a Dalek there.
Yeah. I remember I went to Llangollen. I went to the factory there, the pole, is it? Yeah. And or however you want to say it. And they had the exhibition there. And I don't know if it was actually the one. Is it Who 3? Is it the car?
The Who one, the actual Bessie. The yellow one was Bessie.
Yellow, yeah. Yeah, because to be fair, he was a bit of a James Bond type character, really. Yeah. Sort of like different little vehicles and what have you, didn't he? He was here, there, and everywhere.
But I think as well, in his very last episode of story, Planet of the Spiders, again, with me saying last time about Roger's last story being Beautiful being his last hurrah and being allowed to do what he does best. Pertwee's last episode, I thought, well, John loves his gadgets, loves his cars. That pretty much the whole of the second episode of that is a car chase where John gets to fly a little mini gyrocopter, drive a Jeep, drive a car, drive the Whomobile, have a chase in a hovercraft, jump from a hovercraft to a boat. So you've got all the big action hero stuff that he absolutely loved doing in his last episode. But also in that last story as well, you've got, it's quite clever because I said at the beginning, I found when I was younger, I found the Pertwee Doctor quite arrogant, intimidating, establishment Tory sort of. And it's almost like that side of his character, the not so pleasant side of his character, is his downfall, because he admits that he is a greedy character and he's got a greed for knowledge and a greed for knowing and winning. And he sacrifices himself for that to basically, he sacrifices his third life because he says that facing up to his fear of that he is inadequate was more important than being alive. So far from being this sort of pompous character, he's actually very, very humble and realizes his own failings, and he actually dies for his beliefs, which is quite moving. Quite
a character progression on that one, or character or realization, maybe you should use that word. Going back to what you just said about all his little vehicles, I mean, he was, I think he was madly into his motorbikes, wasn't he? I think, and
he was.
He used to ride them up into, apparently until a couple of years before he died. I'm not sure what stopped him doing it a couple of years before he died, but from what I can gather, he was riding motorbikes into his 70s. That was his hobby, really. That was his way to relax and what have you. So, what would you say is your favourite Pertwee story then? I mean, you might have already touched on it, but And
Do you know,
why?
I'd have to say today, it might change tomorrow, but today I would have to say, you touched on it already, the Green Death. What you've got in that, you've got the beginning of the end of the Third Doctor with his greed for knowledge and adventure, where he goes to the planet Metababies 3 and steals the blue crystal, which brings his downfall in Planet the Spiders. You've got possibly the last great hurrah of the unit team. So you've got Captain Yates, the Brigadier, Sergeant Benson, and Joe Grant, and it's Joe Grant's last story as well. So Joe leaves in that. And the very, very last scene is incredibly moving. You can tell, first of all, the Doctor is absolutely choked that Joe's gone. But I think Pertwee, losing his mate Katie Manning from the cast, is pretty choked as well.
Yeah.
And the very last scene where he's in the party, where Joe's engagement party, where he's given a glass of champagne, he sort of necks the champagne, and the next scene is just him and Bessie just driving away on his own into the sunset. And it's pretty moving. And Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat sort of riffed on that in an episode of Sherlock. There's an episode of Sherlock where John Watson gets married, and the ending is very, very similar to the ending of the Green Death. But you've got in the Green Death as well, again, you've got this way, way, way ahead of its time green politics in it, and the how bad pollution and how short term sort of polluting industries can be, and how we should be all moving on to sustainable methods of producing food, sustainable methods of producing energy. But it wasn't done in a preachy sort of way. It was done. It was subtle. It was part of the story. But it treated, I think, even though it's a children's show, family show, it treated its viewing audience with respect. It didn't ram it down their throats. It was subtle. I think it gave the audience something to think about the way they lived their own lives, without saying, you must not do this, you're bad for using coal. It was a subtle message implanted. And, definitely the Green Death is my favourite Pertwee story. What about yours, Ash?
Well, it would have to be Death to the Daleks, but before I just go to that one, there's a scene in the Green Death. I'm sure it's the Green Death. There's one scene where he's there and he's trying to, I think he's trying to find an antidote.
That's right, yes. Yeah. That's the one.
And this scene goes on for it's just weird. I was just wondering whether it was going anywhere when they were actually recording it, because it's him with his test tubes and he's basically just putting little samples from one test tube to another and so on and so forth, waiting to get a chemical reaction. And I was there, and he goes on for about easily a minute, and I was thinking, is this going somewhere? Are we going to get some sort of like chemical reaction? And the answer is no. So I don't know. I'm not sure whether it didn't work or. But yeah, no. I was fascinated. It was one of those scenes that holds on to your attention because you feel it's going somewhere, and then it doesn't. So never mind.
I think the payoff from that's a bit later on, where Joe, in a sort of echo of her very, very first scene, where she comes into the doctor's lab, knocks everything over and ruins an experiment. She comes into the lab, knocks something over, and by accident solves the problem by realizing this fungus they were growing is the antidote. So I think you get the payoff a little bit later on.
Yeah, mine's Death. Yeah, mine's Death to the Daleks. I don't know. I just I remember it was probably one of the first VHSs that I had of Doctor Who. I remember having Death to the Daleks, Terror of the Zygons. So those two are, I know that's obviously a Tom one, but those two are kind of big favourites for me, just because I watched them time and time and time again. Because of course, you've got to remember, not like nowadays where you can basically watch what you want when you want. Those episodes weren't broadcast on TV, were they?
No.
They were broadcast initially, and then if you did want to watch it, it was about home video, home media, really, and those weren't even sometimes that expensive that cheap back in the day. So you didn't have lots of stuff, like now you can literally just watch what you want when you want. I don't really know. I suppose it's because it's got a bit of everything. It's got the Daleks in it. It's just, he's quite, but as with every charismatic, he's there with his little, very unique sort of dress sense. Of course, this is pre outfits, if you know what I mean. Yeah, in the sense of
it was the look, wasn't it, rather than an outfit?
Yeah, it was the look, and so I just remember it mainly probably because I watched it so many times. But for me, it's just got a special place in my heart for that story, really. And I could watch it again and again and again. Try and think what the sidekick in that one is. You know, like
Bilal.
what?
Bilal, he's called, and the actor who plays him is 101, and he's the oldest actor still alive that's ever been in Doctor Who.
Still alive?
His name's Arnold Yarrow. His name is, and I think he was still alive last time I checked. But if I'm wrong, I apologise. But he's the oldest surviving actor still in Doctor Who.
I'll tell you what, Wellen, let's just do this. Let's do it. Right, okay, so.
Arnold Yarrow.
Let's Google together. Death of the Daleks, here we are. Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. Well, it would be.
He's 102, he's still going.
Still going.
102
Arnold Yarrow.
2 years old.
Oh, yeah, right.
So, going on from Doctor Who now to Worzel Gumidge, again, I don't think the sort of modern audience would realise how big Worzel Gumidge was, because the Christmas special, I remember, I must have been 8 or 9 maybe, there's a Christmas special called A Slice of Cake and a Cup of Tea.
I can Mr. Butman and a cup of tea and a slice of cake.
Oh. And it got the front. It got the front of the TV Times. It was that massive. It was was it Christmas Day? It was the big show on Christmas.
I've still got my Worzel Gumidge annuals in the garage. I think this is the thing that kids do kind of miss out on these days, is that because you've got so many channels.
Yeah,
I'm not sure programs have quite the same significance as they used to.
There's not the impact. There's not the impact anymore.
You know, when we were little, 3, 4 channels maybe. Channel 5 didn't exist anyway, and these things were big televisual events.
Definitely. But it was huge, and to have lightning to strike once in a career like Doctor Who, being massive with Doctor Who is something, but from lightning to strike twice, for him to be a massive success, not be typecast as the Doctor and be an absolute massive success as Worzel Gumidge as well. There's not many actors that get that.
No. But I'm just trying to think now, because there's, it's a shame, isn't it? Because that I didn't really realise until probably from the last 4 or 5 years that Charlotte Coleman, who played Sue, that she passed away.
Yeah, she passed away quite a while ago. She was Marmalade Atkins, if I remember, in the 80s on children's ITV.
Yeah,
but quite young, poor girl.
It was an asthma attack, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. And I mean, that's just tragic. Although there is, I don't know if you've seen it. Try and think what it's called now. I'll try and find out. They've done one more recent. They've kind of gone back to Worzel Gumidge more recently. I don't mean the reboot, yeah. I mean actually with the original characters, well, the ones that are alive, yeah, and with us. And they go to a field. Obviously, this is Jon Pertwee wasn't with them, but they go back to Scatterbrook. Just try and think what it's called.
Is it a documentary or a drama?
No, it's like a short. It's a short. It is. Hang on, wait a minute. I will find out for our listeners.
Okay.
And then, if I find out for our listeners, Scatterbrook Days, it's called. If you look it up on YouTube, guys, Scatterbrook Days. It's just a little short. It's like it's less than 5 minutes. It might just be 5 minutes, but it's going back to there, and you don't really see anything. I think from memory, they walk along, and you're getting sort of like the feel for it, and then they go to a field, and they look in the field, and you just see sort of more of a blurred. It's almost like a blur shot of Worzel, the back of Worzel, and that's kind of where it finishes. But if you're a Worzel Gumidge fan,
that's pretty sweet, actually. I like that.
Nice to watch. It's nice to watch.
Yeah, I'll give that a look. One more thing to say about Jon Pertwee. Again, I'm sure most of our listeners would know this, but he actually recorded a record called "I Am the Doctor."
Yes. This was very popular, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and he also did the Worzel Gumidge song as well. So he was he's multimedia as it was back then. What is it as we call now? But "I Am the Doctor," where he almost sort of talked this thing over the Doctor Who theme tune.
Yeah, I remember it now. I couldn't tell you what it is, but I do remember that now. And then, like you say, he did one for Worzel Gumidge.
And it was a little bit of a hit, wasn't it? Sort of again, late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what that one was. Oh,
Was it called Worzel's song?
Yeah, probably. But I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think what the tune was. I can remember the Doctor Who one a bit more vividly now because it was like, I am the Doctor. It was
That's the one.
Yeah.
I cross the void beyond the mind, the empty space that circles time.
I am the Doctor.
So there we are. So actually,
Jon Pertwee.
we've gone off on a totally different tangent there, but we've actually found out lots of different things about Jon Pertwee. But I think
Well,
that concludes it for today, to be honest with you. So I hope you've enjoyed it, Ed. Any sort of
I genuinely really enjoyed this one. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for listening. And Ash, as always, it's been a pleasure, and I'll see you on the next one.
And what do we think our next one will be about? Should we do? Actually, we'll do like a James Bond theme.
Go on then. What do you want to talk about next
Both
time?
Times Are Sometimes Cool will return. Talking about.
Go on.
We've got to go with the Bond one, really, now, haven't we?
We have.
I think we've got to go with Pierce Brosnan.
We'll go with Pierce Brosnan. Okay.
Pierce Brosnan's next, and then I think after that, folks, what we're going to do, because we're doing this probably, it's about it's one a week. I think we're going to break off, and we're going to yet to be decided, but we're going to do a non-Bond, non-Doctor Who episode. I think. So
that sounds good to me.
Me and Ed will next week tell you what that one is going to be, and hopefully you'll tune in for that as well. All right, guys. Well, thanks ever so much for listening. Ed, you've been fantastic. And
thanks, Ash.
Knowledge as always, especially when it comes to Doctor Who. So until next time, we have been Bow Ties Are Sometimes Cool. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you later.